Hello, this is Lamar Smith, and I've prepared this video on behalf of the Arizona Association of Conservation Districts to help you find out information about ecological sites for your property or maybe your conservation district or a watershed or whatever area you're interested in making a plan or finding out more information about. Now, I'm going to assume that since you're interested in this, you probably know what an ecological site is, but just quickly, I'll kind of review a little bit of that. Ecological sites are a classification of land that's based on similarities in the ability to produce certain types of vegetation. And that means it has a similar soil and climate and topography, and it'll respond to management in similar ways. So it's a good basis for conducting inventories, for making assessments, and for making predictions about what kind of management is needed and how the site will respond. If you need to know more than that about it, there's information on the Arizona Association's website to describe it in more detail. Here shows kind of how the ecological sites relate to the landscape. You can see here a granitic hills site up here on the hills. Soils are developed on granite bedrock. They're usually pretty shallow, very rocky, steep. These areas down in here developed on old alluvial fans. It's alluvial material. Some of them have a lot of caliche that's collected on them, particularly on the older upper elevation soils. Down in here is more sediments that are coming down these draws and have a deeper soil, usually with no clay or caliche in it. And then down here in the bottom along the San Pedro River, areas that are sub-irrigated or occasionally flooded. So all of those have a different potential to produce vegetation. They all have basically the same rainfall, but they are quite different in terms of soils and therefore different kinds of vegetation that would be produced. Now, the Natural Resource Conservation Service has divided the whole country, including Arizona, into what they call major land resource areas. That's the one shown in colors on this map. For instance, this is the yellow color is the Colorado Plateau, the purple is the Mojave Desert, and so on. And these are areas that are similar in terms of general patterns of climate, topography, soils, vegetation, and so on. Doesn't mean it's uniform throughout, but it's just a repeating pattern that's different from another area. Each one of those is divided into what's called a common resource area, which is or an environmental zone, which is based mainly on rainfall, and it's correlated with elevation usually. So for instance, in the Mojave Desert, we have three common resource areas. One is a 3 to 6 inch rainfall zone, one is 6 to 9, and one is 9 to 12. And so the potential for producing vegetation types and amounts is different in those different areas. Every ecological site has a unique identifier. Everyone in the whole country, the whole United States, has a different site ID number. This number tells you that R means it's a rangeland site. If it was a forest site, it would have an F there. It tells you the major land resource area number, which is 30. That's Mojave Desert. 101 means it's in common resource area or environmental zone 1. And every ecological site in that common resource area will have a numbers in the 100 series. In other words, 101, 102, 100, up to how many ever there are in there. So that, and it tells you then it's for Arizona. If it was described in Utah, it would have a UT after it, and so on. They also have a name and a precipitation zone attached to the name. And the thing you need to remember about this is that these are not unique. That same name can be used in different areas, although the vegetation may be different because it's in a different major land resource area or common resource area. For example, one of the names would be Basalt Hills, 3 to 6 inch PZ, that stands for precipitation zone. It means it's in CRA 30-1. But you could have the same name over in Major Land Resource Area 40, for example, or you could have Basalt Hills 6 to 9. It would be in CRA 30-2. So you need to keep that in mind. Now, the best source of information about ecological sites is in EDIT. This stands for Ecosystem Dynamics Interpretive Tool. It's an online information system that's maintained by the Natural Resource Conservation Service and the Agricultural Research Service out of the Jornada Experimental Range in New Mexico. All of the ecological sites in the country are listed there, and they give a full description of every one of them. But to access this, you need to know what the ID number is. And there are several ways that you can find that. I'll discuss some of those, and then we'll go back and discuss what you can get when you get to EDIT. One way to find out which ecological sites you have, probably the easiest way for a lot of people, is just ask your local Natural Resource Conservation Service guy. And particularly if you have a conservation plan on your farm or ranch, you probably have a map of it already, or the NRCS office would have a map that they could give you. So that's the quick way to do it. If you are, and if you're looking for a whole district or a much larger area, then there may be other ways that are better. Another way is to look at, find the soil survey that covers area. This is a map of all the soil surveys in Arizona as of 2011 in green. The white areas are areas that are not covered by soil surveys. Most of those are on national forest lands, which don't make the soil surveys readily available to the public. But if you find that number, then you can go online, or you can go into Web Soil Survey online and look at that soil survey and locate your area on there. It'll have a list of, it'll have all the soils mapped and the corresponding ecological sites. Here's one of the published soil surveys. These are the hard copy surveys that they used to put out before. You can still find some of these in some of the NRCS offices. They can be quite useful. They have good information in them. Just because they aren't on a computer doesn't mean they're not any good. So if you can find one of these, it might be a good thing to have. One thing about these older soil surveys is that they have maps, paper maps. You can see the lines there that show the soil mapping units that correlate with ecological sites. And you can take that out in the field with you and draw on it and find yourself. And some of us old timers kind of like that. Now, another way that you can find information about ecological sites is to use Google Earth, Google Earth Pro. You may have this on your computer. If you don't, you can download it for free. And you can also download an app on it that's called Soil Web. You see where the arrow is over to the left. You can download that onto your Google program, and it will have all of the soil information then on your computer. Here is an example. I zoom down to a certain level. You don't get these soil mapping units at the at the lower zoom levels. You have to go down pretty close to get it, but keep going until you see the yellow lines come up, and you'll see that each one of them has a number on it. That's the number of the soil mapping unit. And if you pop on it, click on it, this will come up. It shows you that this soil mapping unit, this one is number 38. It's a sonoidal gravelly sandy loam. It is also correlated with the sandy loam upland 8 to 12 inch precip zone. That is the name of the ecological site. And this is really neat. If you click on that sandy loam upland ecological site, it will bring you into edit and bring up the ecological site description for that ecological site. You see it's in major land resource area 1, common resource area 2, and this is the site name. Now I'm going to go back later and tell you what this description will show, but that's an easy way to get there. And all you got to do is put Google on your computer and get that soil web app. This shows another soil mapping unit on Google. This one is a complex mapping unit, and many of them are. It has 2 different soils in it, Anthony and Gila, and they're associated with different ecological sites. One is a sandy wash, one's a loamy swale. That means that this was too complicated to map out separately, and so you need to be aware, if you're out there on the ground, that just because it's within that mapping unit, you don't know for sure which ecological site you're on. You need to identify that on the ground. Still, let's go to Web Soil Survey. To do this, you just take your computer, go on the internet, click in our Web Soil Survey, and it'll bring up a screen like this. And you can punch the green button to start it. It'll bring up a map, looks something like this. And you can navigate around this map to find where your area of interest is. You use these 3 buttons up here. One is to zoom, make it bigger, one's to make it smaller, and one's to pan around. If you've done any looking on maps, Google Maps and so on, you know how to do that. It'll let you move around. There's other ways to be rather than all over the country for one ranch. There's other ways to get there a little easier. One of them is to push in state and county here. And if you do that, it will allow you to say, okay, in this case, I want Arizona and Cochise County. And that brings up this view. You can see there's the Wilcox Playa. It shows most of Cochise County here. And since I used to live in that area, then I pretty well find that ranch from there by running down the roads and so on and locate where I want to be. And that's where it is. This is where the ranch is, the general area. So now I need to restrict this or identify an area of interest in this particular area that I want to get the information on. You can do this several ways. One is to area of interest using one of these buttons up here. This one, the one on the right, would allow you to go around. And if you know where the ranch boundaries are, like if you know that's the fence line, you can just click on that and you can draw in an irregular shaped area that just matches the ranch. If you don't know for sure, then you can use a rectangle and just include the general area where the ranch is, as I will show you on the next slide. That I did a general area there. That I was sure that covered the whole ranch, but it's going to cover some areas outside the ranch too. So that, if that doesn't bother you, that's okay. As long as you're just looking for information, maybe that's all you need. Now, there is another way to get it more accurately. If you have a shapefile, you can import an area of interest using a shapefile. There's the name of the file that I had on my computer, and I just use this part down here in red. It says create AOI from shapefile. And when I do that, it comes in and tells me exactly where the branch boundaries are. Now, if you're not a GIS person, you may not know what a shapefile is. A shapefile merely is one that shows what the boundaries of the current area are. They've been digitized someplace. You don't have to know how to do GIS to use them. If your local NRCS guy can give you those shapefiles, if he's done a plan on the ranch, you can use that. Or if you wanted a watershed, you can usually find shapefiles that outline the watershed and so on. But it's a good way to get the boundaries right without having to guess whether you're identifying the fence lines correctly or not. Then, if I want to find out about the ecological sites within that area of interest, I go up here and I punch Soil Data Explorer, Soil Reports, and then come down here and punch Vegetative Productivity. When I do that, it comes up with a link to ecological site descriptions and edit. And if I select that, it will produce a report like this. It shows me the map symbols, the components of each one. This is a complex unit, so it's got two different soils in it. This shows the percent of each on the average in that mapping unit. It shows the ecological site associated with each soil. It gives the name of the site associated with each soil. And over here, it has a link to edit. You can just punch that and it'll take you right back into edit, just like Google did. There it is, loamy upland, 12 to 16 inch. That's the cover sheet for the site description. Now, there's still another way, and that is the Arizona Association of Conservation Districts Conservation Portal, which you can use if you have access to it. At this time, only certain people have access, and so if you're just looking for your own ranch, this may not be the best way. You may be better off going to a web soil survey or Google Earth. If you're looking to do something for the whole district or a large watershed, you may be better off with the Conserve Arizona portal, because web soil survey limits your area of interest to 100,000 acres. And so you can get web soil survey area of interest for a whole soil survey. Well, that may not match to your area, but your area of interest. But a lot of the watersheds exceed 100,000 acres. So that's dealing with larger areas, you may want to work with the portal. Here's an example. This is the Gila Valley Conservation District that I can identify on the portal. I didn't want to look at the whole district, so I selected a smaller area of interest here. I just drew that in on the portal. It's an area on the Sandstone River, and that's the area of interest that I'm going to look at. I can select the tab on the portal that says Common Resource Areas, and it will tell me that's in Common Resource Area 41.2. Then I can select ecological sites. This is a mapping unit here I'm interested in. And I want to say identify this area. And it will show that mapping unit that I selected. And it says, here is the ecological site ID number, the ecological site name. This tells where we got the information. And this tells the soil survey and the mapping unit number. In other words, this is soil survey 664, mapping unit 38. So you got some good information right there. That shows another soil mapping unit or ecological site in the same, and partly in the same area. This is the clay loam upland. And that shows how the first one relates to the whole area of interest. You can see it overlaps. I mean, it's not entirely within the area of interest. If I want to get acreages of the ecological site within that area of interest, the report will do that. It reports just on how many acres are within the area of interest. Now, however I got to edit, let me explain some about what's there when you get there. The first thing you'll see is a page that says select data catalog, and it has two possibilities here. One site descriptions, one's ecological site groups. This one's not very well developed yet. It may be very useful in the future, but this is the one, the ecological site descriptions is the one we're interested in now. A little further down that page, it'll ask you to identify the major land resource area that you're interested in. And you can either do it by list or using a map. And I chose to use a list. If you choose the list, it'll give you all of them across the whole country. You can look for the ones for Arizona and go down and pick out the one you want. You could do the same thing on the map. If you know what it is, and you probably do by this time, you can just type in 41, which is the number of it, and it'll pick, and here it is, 41 Southeastern Arizona Basin and Range. So you can select that one, and then it'll ask you if you want an ecological site list, all the ecological sites within that major land resource area. If you do that, you'll get a long list. There's 113 of them in that, it turns out, in that major land resource area. It'll show you 20 of them to start with. And over here, you can punch this button if you want to see them all. So you can say, see them all, and then go down there and pick the one you want. Or you can say, search for sandy loam upland. And it'll come up and say, okay, there's 3 of them that has the name sandy loam upland in them. As you can see, they're all in a different precipitation zone. In other words, a different common resource area. And so this is the one that we were hunting for. We know the number. And so we punch on it to get the description. They're the same one we saw before, you remember. This is the opening page. Here it tells you it's provisional. That means it's still subject to some revisions possibly in the future. If you go on down that page a little further, it'll tell you that it is provisional. It'll show you a map, shows it where it's been mapped. And then it'll give you a menu over here of all the things you can find out about that ecological site. And you can pick whichever ones you're particularly interested in, or you can pick them all. And you can print all sections or print parts of it or whatever. You may not want the whole thing. There's a lot of repetition in some of the climatic features. In other words, all the ones in one common resource area are going to be basically the same in terms of climate. Further down, there's some similar sites. This gives you a brief thing about what's the dominant plant species. And down here it says download full description. If you want the whole thing, just punch that. It'll download a PDF on your computer of the entire ecological site description. And sometimes you may want that, sometimes you may not want the whole thing. Usually it's the ecological dynamics area that we're the most interested in. That's the one that tells you about what the vegetation is like and what kind of vegetation changes might occur on that site. For instance, here's a so-called state and transition model. These are not developed for every site, but there eventually will be. It shows you different kinds of plant communities. These boxes represent states or plant communities, and the arrows represent transitions from one to another. This is a very useful thing for planning and assessment because you can say, well, here's where I am now. Here's what I'd like, where I'd like to be. And I don't see any way to get there. There's no arrow going back that other way. And so maybe I don't have a choice. If I'm down here, I might be able to move over to here. And each of these transitions is described. So it might be something like, well, it's long-term, heavy, continuous grazing from there to here. And it might be prescribed grazing or maybe brush control that would allow it to shift back up to there. Here's a simplified one that might be a little easier to understand. So if we go from native grassland, maybe through excessive grazing, it gets invaded by mesquite. If we do mesquite control, we might be able to move it back over to here. If layman lovegrass invades and mesquite both, it may be that we can move it back, or maybe we can't. It may say, that transition may say, well, you can get rid of the mesquite, but you may not be able to get rid of the layman. So it gives you, and eventually we can go down here to one that has nothing much but mesquite and eroding soil. So it's a very useful tool for deciding what your objectives are, what kind of treatments to apply, what results to expect. Also gives you some breakdown on what they think the historic plant community was like in terms of, in this case, life forms. They think it was 51% grass, about 9% forbs, 20% shrubs, and a few trees. And this breaks it down a little further into certain categories of shrubs, vines, and so on. This is some similar information, the different life forms, and tells you what the estimated production, dry matter production per year would be in a low precip year, an average, and a high precip year. This doesn't mean forage, this means all production of all kinds of plants. And then it gives you some information about the ground cover, how much litter that might be there, whether it has biological crust, whether it has gravel on the surface, and so on. There's a lot of other information in there. I just kind of hit the high points. Here's the community tables that would show, and this is just a part of a long list that tells you different grasses. It has them classified sometimes by cool season, warm season, short grass, tall grass, so on. Gives you the names, gives you the expected production per acre in the historic plant community. And then finally, the Arizona Association is developing a database that will be on the website, and it will have all the ecological sites in the state and have a one-page summary of the characteristics of that site like this. It'll tell you the number and the name, where it occurs, what's a little bit about the soil depths and texture, what historic vegetation type it was, what some of the major species are, and the annual production and so on. And in other words, that may be kind of a nutshell what you really want to know. And that will be available so that if you're doing a plan, you can just copy these and paste them into your plan if you want to. That concludes the video. I hope it's been helpful to you to find information about the ecological sites in your area.